Bailiff, remove her. Spectators do not sit at council table. Judge Richard Whitmore's voice cracked through the federal courtroom like cold steel striking marble. The room fell still for half a second, then came the quiet sounds that hurt worse than shouting. A muffled chuckle. A chair creaking. Someone whispering. Wrong room. Danielle Brooks did not move. She sat alone beneath the cold white glow of the courtroom lights, fingers wrapped tightly around a weathered leather folder resting on the polished oak table in front of her. The heating vents hummed overhead, but somehow the room still felt cold. Her charcoal suit was simple. No flashy jewelry. No expensive handbag. Just a silver watch with a scratched face and a legal pad filled with notes written in sharp, precise handwriting. Judge Whitmore adjusted his glasses and glanced at her again, irritation sharpening the lines around his mouth. 61 years old, silver-haired, respected across Illinois for running the tightest courtroom in Chicago, he carried himself like a man who believed he could read a person in 3 seconds flat. And right now, he thought he had. "Ma'am," he said again, slower this time, like patience itself was beneath him. "Family seating is in the back." A few attorneys smirked behind glowing laptop screens. One young associate leaned toward another. "Maybe she got lost," he whispered. Danielle heard it. Every word. Her jaw tightened for just a second, then relaxed. She had learned long ago that humiliation had a sound. It sounded like quiet laughter in expensive shoes. The kind people made when they thought you did not belong in the room. She slowly uncapped her pen. Calm hands. Steady breathing. Outside the courthouse windows, downtown Chicago shimmered under pale morning sunlight, but inside Courtroom 7, tension pressed thick into the air like heat before a storm. The bailiff started down the aisle. Heavy footsteps. Leather belt creaking. Danielle looked up at him, then back toward the judge. "You may want to check the case record first, Your Honor," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. No shaking. No anger. That only seemed to irritate Whitmore more. "I do not need instruction on courtroom procedure," he snapped. "Especially not from someone who is clearly out of place." The words landed harder than he intended. Danielle felt the sting anyway. Not because it was new. Because it was familiar. Too familiar. Her thumb brushed the edge of the folder. The old leather had softened with age, worn smooth in places by years of carrying it through law school hallways, subway rides, sleepless nights. Her father's initials were still faintly visible in the corner. DB. A memory flickered through her mind so quickly it almost hurt. 12 years old. Sitting outside another courtroom. Watching deputies escort her father away in handcuffs while nobody listened to him. Nobody looked at him. Nobody cared. She swallowed the memory whole. "Not today!" Judge Whitmore leaned back in his chair, impatience spreading across his face. "Bailiff," he repeated sharply. "Escort her out until actual counsel arrives." The courtroom shifted with quiet anticipation now. Lawyers looked up from their screens. Reporters near the back straightened in their seats. Even opposing counsel exchanged glances. Something about the woman's composure felt wrong. If she was embarrassed, she hid it too well. Danielle stood slowly. Not rushed. Not angry. Just controlled. The kind of calm that made people uncomfortable. The bailiff hesitated beside her. "Ma'am," he said softly. Then the courtroom doors slammed open so hard they rattled the glass panels. Every head turned. A man in a navy suit rushed inside, breathing hard, briefcase half open, panic written all over his face. He stopped dead when he saw Danielle standing beside the bailiff. His expression drained of color. "Oh my God!" he muttered under his breath. Then louder, voice shaking just enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "Your Honor, what exactly do you think you are doing?" The room went so quiet the fluorescent lights suddenly sounded loud. Judge Whitmore straightened in his chair, irritation flickering into confusion. The man standing in the doorway adjusted his tie with trembling hands, chest still rising hard from running. "Your Honor," he repeated, voice tighter now. That woman is Danielle Brooks. A few people exchanged glances. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed too loudly. Danielle stood beside the counsel table, one hand resting lightly on the leather folder, expression unreadable. Whitmore frowned. "And?" he asked coldly. The man blinked like he could not believe the question. "And she is lead trial counsel for the plaintiff." A sharp silence cut through the room. Somewhere near the back, a reporter lowered her coffee too quickly and spilled a drop across her notebook. The young associate who had laughed earlier slowly looked down at his laptop screen, suddenly fascinated by nothing. Judge Whitmore's jaw shifted once. "Barely. Lead counsel?" he repeated. Danielle finally met his eyes fully. Calm. Steady. No anger in her face. Somehow that made it worse. "Yes, Your Honor," she said quietly. "I filed my appearance 3 weeks ago." The courtroom air seemed to tighten. Whitmore glanced toward the clerk seated below him. "Clerk?" The older woman adjusted her glasses with nervous fingers and opened the electronic docket. The clicking of keys echoed louder than it should have. She stopped. Swallowed once. Yes, Your Honor." Her voice softened. "Attorney Danielle Brooks is listed as lead counsel of record." Something shifted behind Whitmore's eyes then. Not embarrassment. Not yet. Calculation. The kind a powerful man made when reality refused to match his assumptions. Danielle slowly sat back down at the counsel table, smoothing one hand over the edge of her legal pad. The scrape of her chair across polished wood sounded strangely final. Across the aisle, opposing counsel stared openly now. One attorney leaned toward another. "That is Brooks?" he whispered. "The Danielle Brooks?" The answer came back barely audible. "The one who beat 3 federal fraud cases last year." The whisper spread like electricity. Danielle heard it but gave nothing away. No satisfaction. No smirk. Just focus. Judge Whitmore adjusted the papers in front of him harder than necessary. "Very well," he said, voice clipped. "Let us proceed." But something had changed. Everyone felt it. The room no longer belonged entirely to him. Danielle reached into her folder and carefully removed a thick binder packed with color-coded tabs. Her fingers moved with practiced precision. Calm hands. Controlled breathing. Across the courtroom, one opposing attorney quietly loosened his tie. Another reached for water. "Ms. Brooks," Whitmore said, tone suddenly measured, "I trust you are prepared." Danielle looked up. For half a second, sunlight slipped through the courthouse windows and caught the edge of her silver watch. "I have been prepared for a very long time, Your Honor." The sentence landed harder than anyone expected. Even Whitmore seemed to feel it. Then came the sound. Fast footsteps outside the courtroom. Urgent. Uneven. The doors pushed open again. A federal clerk hurried inside carrying a sealed envelope, face pale. "Urgent filing for the court," she said breathlessly. "Just came through from the Department of Justice." The room shifted uneasily. Whitmore opened the envelope. His eyes moved once across the page. Then again. The color in his face changed so subtly most people would have missed it. Danielle did not. She noticed everything. Whitmore slowly lowered the paper. His voice came quieter now. Almost cautious. "Ms. Brooks." He paused. The courtroom leaned into the silence. "Why exactly did the Department of Justice just request emergency oversight on your case?" The silence after Judge Whitmore's question felt heavier than the marble walls around them. Nobody shifted. Nobody coughed. Even the heating vents seemed quieter now. Danielle Brooks slowly closed the binder in front of her, fingertips brushing the edge with deliberate calm. Across the courtroom, reporters exchanged looks and one discreetly lifted a phone beneath the bench, screen glowing faint blue. Something bigger than a routine case had just walked into the room. Danielle looked directly at Whitmore. No panic. No rush. Just stillness. "Because this case was never supposed to stay local," she said softly. A murmur moved through the courtroom like wine through dry leaves. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Explain. His voice came sharper this time, trying to reclaim authority. Danielle reached into her folder and slid a second document across the table. Thick, sealed tabs. Federal markings stamped across the top. The silver courthouse lights reflected across the metal clasp of her briefcase as she opened it with practiced precision. 3 weeks ago, she said, my team uncovered evidence that this corporation knowingly falsified housing safety reports in 7 states. A chair scraped sharply somewhere behind opposing counsel. One attorney shifted so fast his pen dropped to the floor. Danielle did not even glance his way. Including federally subsidized housing. She continued, voice calm enough to make the room uneasy. Families were living in buildings declared structurally safe while internal reports showed electrical failures, toxic water exposure, and falsified inspections. The courtroom shifted. Small movements. Uneasy glances. A whisper near the back. Somebody muttered, Jesus Christ. Whitmore looked down at the DOJ letter again. His fingers paused on the page. You are suggesting criminal liability? Danielle tilted her head slightly. I am saying the Department of Justice believes criminal liability is possible. Across the aisle, opposing counsel stood suddenly. Richard Halpern. White-haired. Expensive suit. The kind of lawyer who usually smiled when entering courtrooms. He was not smiling now. Your Honor, he said tightly. This is grandstanding. Danielle did not even look at him. That somehow made it worse. Is it? She asked quietly. She pressed a button on her tablet. A projector screen flickered alive at the front of the courtroom. Grainy footage filled the wall. Apartment ceilings collapsed inward. Exposed wires sparking behind children's bedrooms. Families speaking through tears. One mother held up a photograph of black mold spreading across a nursery wall. The room went still again. Danielle's voice lowered. Softer now. More dangerous. 9-year-old asthma patients, she said. Senior citizens hospitalized. 2 deaths currently under federal review. Nobody laughed anymore. The young associate who mocked her earlier stared hard at the floor. Whitmore shifted in his chair, slower this time. Less certain. Ms. Brooks, he said carefully, why was the court not informed of the federal dimension sooner? Danielle held his gaze for a long second. Because, she said, voice steady, someone kept sealing motions before they reached hearing. The sentence landed like shattered glass. The courtroom froze. Opposing counsel went pale. Even Whitmore blinked once. Slow. Controlled. But Danielle saw it. Saw the flicker behind his eyes. Confusion. Recognition. Something else. Fear. Then came the sound. Fast footsteps again. Urgent this time. The courtroom doors pushed open and the federal clerk hurried back inside, breath uneven, another sealed envelope shaking slightly in her hand. Your Honor, she said quietly, eyes darting between Danielle and the bench. The DOJ says there is one more issue. Whitmore reached for the letter. His fingers slowed halfway there. What issue? The clerk swallowed hard. Sir? She hesitated. It concerns someone inside this courthouse. The courtroom seemed to shrink around those last words. Someone inside this courthouse. A whisper spread through the benches like a spark hitting dry paper. Phone cameras tilted upward. Quiet clicks echoed beneath the silence as reporters subtly hit record. Judge Whitmore stayed perfectly still for one long second, but the muscles in his jaw tightened hard enough to show. Clarify, he said, voice lower now, sharper. The federal clerk hesitated, fingers trembling around the sealed envelope. The Department of Justice flagged irregular procedural interference, she said carefully. Evidence suggests sealed motions and evidence delays may have originated from internal judicial channels. The room shifted. A soft gasp. A chair scraping against marble. Across the aisle, Richard Halpern stood frozen, one hand gripping the edge of counsel table too tightly. Danielle Brooks did not move. Her posture remained calm, shoulders level, pen resting beside her legal pad like she had expected the storm to arrive eventually. Whitmore opened the envelope himself this time. The fluorescent lights caught the reflection off his reading glasses as his eyes scanned line after line. His expression changed slowly. Irritation first. Then disbelief. Then something colder. Across the courtroom, Danielle watched the shift happen in real time. Powerful men always looked the same when certainty cracked. Quieter. More dangerous. This is speculation. Halpern snapped suddenly, stepping forward. A procedural misunderstanding being dressed up as corruption. His voice rose too fast. Too loud. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt despite the cold air humming through the vents overhead. Danielle finally looked at him. Calm. Focused. Then why? She asked quietly. Were 6 emergency filings delayed before reaching judicial review? Halpern opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing came out. Danielle pressed a button on her tablet. Another screen flickered alive. Time-stamped court logs appeared wall-size at the front of the room. Filing dates. Delays. Unusual reroutes. Missing signatures. Tiny details no one else had bothered to connect. Everyone saw paperwork, Danielle said softly. I saw a pattern. A low murmur spread again. Even the reporters stopped typing for a second. Whitmore leaned forward now, eyes narrowing at the screen. The reflection of scrolling timestamps danced faintly across the polished wood of the bench. These delays, he said slowly, they all happened before major hearings. Danielle nodded once. And every delay benefited the same corporate defense team. Halpern slammed a folder shut. This is absurd. His voice cracked on the last word. Danielle turned toward him fully for the first time. No anger. Somehow worse. You called me out of place 30 minutes ago, she said. Now you are afraid I looked too closely. The sentence landed hard. Around the room, faces changed. Lawyers who had smirked earlier now avoided eye contact. The young associate who whispered about her being lost slowly lowered his head. Near the back, someone whispered, She already solved it. But Whitmore was not listening anymore. His eyes remained fixed on one specific line in the federal report. His breathing slowed. Then stopped for half a second. Danielle noticed immediately. Your Honor? She said quietly. Whitmore looked up. Older suddenly. Less certain. The report, he said carefully, voice almost too calm, mentions a judicial authorization code. Nobody moved. That code, he continued slowly, belongs to Chambers Access. The room went dead silent. A distant elevator bell echoed faintly somewhere beyond the courtroom walls. Even Halpern stopped talking. Whitmore looked down at the page again, knuckles whitening against the bench. Then, for the first time all morning, his composure cracked. Just slightly. Only 3 people, he said quietly, almost to himself, have access to that code. Danielle's eyes narrowed. Who? She asked. Whitmore swallowed once. Hard. Then slowly looked toward the courtroom doors just as they opened again. His clerk stepped inside. Pale. Shaking. Your Honor! Her voice nearly broke. Your private chambers were just locked from the inside. The courtroom exploded into motion. Locked? Judge Whitmore shot to his feet so fast his chair rolled backward with a sharp crack against the hardwood. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. Reporters stood instantly. Phone cameras rose higher. Somewhere near the back, someone whispered, Oh my God! While another voice muttered, This is not normal. Danielle Brooks stayed seated. Still. Watching. The federal clerk swallowed hard, hands trembling against the folder pressed to her chest. Security says someone entered Chambers 12 minutes ago, she said quietly. They are not responding. Whitmore's face tightened. Who has access? He snapped. The clerk hesitated. Too long. Sweat shimmered near her temple beneath the cold fluorescent lights. Besides you, she whispered. Assistant Clerk Martin Hale. Across the room, Richard Halpern suddenly looked away. Too quickly. Danielle caught it immediately. A tiny movement. But enough. Her fingers tightened around her pen. Your Honor, she said calmly, do not open those chambers yet. The sentence landed hard. Heads turned toward her. Confusion flickered through the room. Whitmore stared at her like he had lost patience entirely. Excuse me? His voice sharpened. Someone is inside my private chambers. Danielle stood slowly now, smoothing the sleeve of her charcoal jacket. And whoever locked themselves in there, she said quietly, already knows the Department of Justice is here. Silence. Thick and immediate. The heating system hummed overhead, strangely loud now. Danielle walked toward the evidence monitor, every step measured against polished courthouse floors. If motions were blocked internally, she continued, someone had advance access to federal filings. She tapped her tablet once. Another screen appeared. Timestamps. Security logs. Entry badges. Tiny details most people never noticed. But Danielle had. Always had. Every sealed delay, she said softly, happened within 15 minutes of one specific badge access. Whitmore narrowed his eyes. Whose? Danielle looked toward the courtroom doors. Then back to him. Martin Hale's. The room shifted all at once. Halpern's face lost color so quickly it almost looked painful. That is ridiculous. He snapped too fast. Too loud. Danielle turned toward him slowly. Calm eyes. Calm breathing. Funny, she said quietly. You knew his name before anyone said it out loud. The room froze. A reporter lowered her phone just enough to stare openly. Someone near the jury benches whispered. Wait, what? Halpern's throat tightened visibly. I know courthouse staff, he muttered. Weak. Defensive. Nobody believed him. Danielle stepped closer to the front of the courtroom now. 3 weeks ago, she said, I noticed emergency motions disappearing before hearings. Her voice stayed calm. Controlled. Dangerous. Experts called it administrative error. She glanced briefly toward Whitmore. People with power usually do. Whitmore said nothing. For the first time all morning, uncertainty sat openly on his face. Danielle continued. Then I found private billing records. She tapped the screen again. New documents flashed alive. Wire transfers. Consulting payments. Hidden retainers. Halpern staggered half a step backward. The room erupted into whispers. No way. That cannot be real. Look at the dates. Danielle's voice lowered further. Payments connected to shell accounts. She paused. One of them linked to someone working inside this courthouse. Whitmore gripped the edge of the bench hard enough for his knuckles to pale. Martin Hale? He asked quietly. Danielle looked at him for a long second. That is what I thought, she said. The pause that followed felt endless. Then came the reversal. Danielle exhaled slowly. Until 30 minutes ago. The room went dead silent again. Whitmore blinked once. What changed? Danielle turned toward him fully now. Her expression softened for the first time. Not pity. Something heavier. The authorization code. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Martin Hale does not have judicial override clearance. Nobody breathed. Only 3 people do. She said carefully. You. Whitmore stiffened. Your chief administrator. Another pause. Slower now. Heavier. Danielle's eyes lifted. Straight to the bench. And the person who personally sealed my motions. Even Halpern stopped breathing. Danielle reached into her folder and slowly placed a single photograph on the evidence camera. The screen lit up overhead. Grainy courthouse security footage. A silver-haired man standing outside records at 11:47 the night before. Judge Whitmore stared upward. The room stared with him. His face drained of color. Because the man in the photograph looked exactly like him. No one spoke. Not immediately. The courtroom sat suspended in a silence so complete it almost felt physical, pressing against skin, tightening throats. Judge Whitmore did not blink. The grainy security image glowed across the courtroom wall, pale courthouse light reflecting off the silver in his hair. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Too close. Too exact. Somewhere near the back, a phone vibrated softly against wood. Nobody reached for it. Danielle Brooks remained standing beside the evidence screen, calm enough to unsettle people. Her hands rested lightly against the edge of the counsel table, steady, controlled, while everyone else looked like they had forgotten how to breathe. Whitmore finally lowered his eyes from the image. Slowly. Carefully. Like sudden movement might crack whatever fragile control he still had left. "That is not me," he said quietly. But the confidence was gone. Even he heard it. Danielle did not argue. That surprised him most. She simply studied him. Watching. Listening. The kind of stillness that made powerful people uncomfortable. Across the aisle, Richard Halpern loosened his tie another inch. Sweat caught the fluorescent light near his temple. "This is insane," he muttered, though the sharpness had drained from his voice. Nobody backed him up. Nobody wanted to stand too close to certainty anymore. Danielle stepped toward the screen and zoomed slowly into the photograph. The pixels sharpened just enough to reveal something small. Easy to miss. A silver watch. The courtroom leaned forward all at once. "Judge Whitmore," Danielle asked softly, "do you still own the Cartier your late wife gave you?" The question landed strangely. Personal. Quiet. Dangerous. Whitmore looked confused for half a second. Then unsettled. His fingers moved instinctively toward his wrist. Empty. He had stopped wearing watches months ago. "How would you know about that?" he asked. Danielle did not answer immediately. The heating system clicked off overhead, leaving the room strangely still. "Because the man in this photo," she said quietly, "is wearing one." She zoomed further. Silver metal caught dim hallway light. The room held its breath. Whitmore stared harder now. Something behind his eyes shifted. Tiny. Almost invisible. "Mine had a scratch," he murmured without meaning to. Danielle nodded once. "Left side of the face," she said softly. "From when it slipped off during your wife's chemo appointment 3 years ago." The room changed then. Not loudly. Quietly. People stopped looking at Danielle like she was just another attorney. Something closer to disbelief moved through the benches. Whitmore looked at her differently too now. Less defensive. More uncertain. "You investigated me?" he asked carefully. Danielle's expression softened, just slightly. "No," she said. "I listened." The sentence settled into the room like dust after impact. Whitmore looked back toward the screen. The silver watch in the photograph looked wrong suddenly. Too clean. Too polished. No scratch. His breathing slowed. Heavy now. Deliberate. "That is not my watch," he whispered. Danielle gave the smallest nod. "Which means someone wanted this to look like you." Across the room, Richard Halpern shifted again. Too fast. Danielle noticed. So did Whitmore this time. The judge's eyes narrowed for the first time in nearly an hour. Not at Danielle. At Halpern. "Counsel," Whitmore said quietly, voice lower than before. "Why are you sweating?" Halpern forced a laugh that sounded painfully thin. "Because this entire circus is insane." But nobody laughed with him. Somewhere near the back, reporters lowered their phones and simply watched now. Waiting. Danielle reached for another folder. Slower this time. More careful. "There is something else," she said quietly. Every eye turned back to her. Even Whitmore's. Her fingers paused against the paper for half a second. Almost reluctant. "I did not want to bring this up publicly," she said. "Not until I was sure." Silence again. Heavy silence. The kind before thunderstorms. Danielle looked directly at Whitmore. Your Honor, her voice lowered. The person inside your chambers is not hiding from the Department of Justice. She stopped. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. Nobody moved. They are hiding from you. Then, somewhere above the courtroom ceiling, came a sound no one expected. A sharp metallic crash, followed by the faint, distant echo of courthouse alarms beginning to wake. The metallic crash echoed again above the courtroom ceiling, sharper this time. Then silence. Heavy, unnatural silence. Every face turned upward. The courthouse alarms flickered once, then steadied into a low warning pulse that painted the marble walls in cold red flashes. Judge Whitmore remained frozen behind the bench, one hand gripping the wood so tightly the veins stood out across his wrist. Across the room, Danielle Brooks did not move. She simply listened. The same way she had all morning. Calm. Focused. Dangerous in her stillness. Everyone stay seated, Whitmore ordered, but the authority in his voice sounded thinner now. Phones remained raised. Reporters whispered into microphones. Somebody near the back muttered, "What is happening up there?" Danielle slowly closed her folder. "They are running out of time," she said quietly. Whitmore turned toward her immediately. "Who?" The question came too fast. Too desperate. Danielle met his eyes for a long second. "The person who planted the evidence against you." The room tightened around those words. Richard Halpern shifted sharply beside counsel table, breathing harder now. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt despite the cold air. Danielle noticed. So did everyone else. "You seem nervous, Mr. Halpern," she said softly. "You should be." The sentence landed harder than shouting. Somewhere behind him, one of his own associates quietly stepped away. Tiny movement. Huge meaning. Halpern laughed once, strained and brittle. "You have no proof." Danielle reached slowly into her briefcase and removed a small silver flash drive. No drama. No performance. Just certainty. "Actually," she said, voice steady, "I spent 3 weeks preparing for the moment someone tried to make this disappear." She placed it carefully onto the evidence table. The overhead lights reflected sharply against the metal casing. Every delayed filing, she continued, triggered an automatic backup. A ripple moved through the room. Whitmore straightened slightly. Hope mixed with disbelief crossing his face too quickly to hide. Danielle turned toward the evidence monitor. Security footage flickered alive. Hallways. Timestamps. Entry logs. Then one clip stopped the room cold. Richard Halpern standing outside chambers after midnight. Speaking quietly with someone hidden just out of frame. Passing over a thick envelope. Nobody breathed. Halpern's face emptied of color. "This is edited," he snapped, but the conviction was gone. Danielle did not even look at him. "Then why?" she asked quietly. "Did your billing records match courthouse access logs down to the minute?" Silence again. Brutal silence. Whitmore lowered himself back into his chair slowly, like gravity suddenly weighed more than before. He looked at Danielle differently now. Not suspicion. Not irritation. Something closer to regret. The same woman he had almost thrown out of court had become the only person holding the room together. Then came another sound overhead. Footsteps. Fast. Uneven. Followed by the sharp click of a lock finally turning. Everyone turned toward the courtroom doors at once. Danielle's expression changed for the first time all morning. Just slightly. Not fear. Concern. "No," she whispered under her breath. Whitmore caught it immediately. "What?" Danielle looked toward the hallway, jaw tightening for the first time. "We are too late." The courtroom doors began to open. The courtroom doors opened slowly. Not dramatic. Worse. Quiet. Heavy. Every eye locked onto the hallway as courthouse security stepped aside and Assistant Clerk Martin Hale appeared between two federal investigators, his tie loosened, shoulders slumped, face drained of color. The room stopped breathing. Richard Halpern took one step backward so subtly he probably thought no one noticed. Danielle Brooks noticed. She noticed everything. Martin would not look at the bench. Would not look at the cameras. Would not look at the crowd. His eyes found the floor and stayed there. The fluorescent lights reflected weakly across the polished marble as the distant courthouse alarm finally faded into silence. Judge Whitmore stood motionless behind the bench. The man who had commanded every room he entered suddenly looked older. Smaller somehow. "Martin," he said quietly. No anger. Just disbelief. Martin swallowed hard. "I never meant for it to go this far," he whispered. The sentence moved through the room like cold air. Phones lowered. Reporters stopped whispering. Even the attorneys who had spent the morning smirking sat perfectly still. Danielle remained beside counsel table, hands folded lightly over her worn leather folder. Calm. Steady. The same calm she carried when everyone thought she did not belong there. "You sealed the motions?" Whitmore asked, voice rougher now. Martin closed his eyes briefly. "Not at first," he admitted. "At first it was just delays. Paperwork. Favors." He glanced once toward Halpern. That was all it took. Every head turned. Halpern stiffened instantly. "Do not look at me," he snapped too quickly. Too sharply. Martin laughed once under his breath. Tired. Hollow. "You told me nobody would get hurt." The room shifted again. Quiet realization spreading seat by seat. The kind nobody could take back. Danielle said nothing. She did not need to. Truth had started moving on its own now. Whitmore lowered himself slowly into his chair. His hand trembled once before flattening against the wood. He looked toward Danielle then. Really looked at her for the first time all morning. The woman he nearly removed from court had seen what everyone else missed. The delays. The patterns. The fear hidden beneath polished reputations. "Ms. Brooks," he said quietly. The entire room turned toward her again. Different this time. No whispers. No smirks. No assumptions. Just waiting. Whitmore exhaled slowly. "You were right." The words landed softly, but somehow hit harder than anything said all day. Danielle held his gaze. Calm. No satisfaction. No revenge. "I just paid attention," she said. The silence afterward felt different now. Less hostile. Heavy in another way. Across the benches, people who had laughed earlier looked away first. One young attorney slowly shut his laptop. A reporter lowered her phone and whispered under her breath. She knew the whole time. But Danielle's expression never changed. Because she was still listening. Still watching. Her eyes shifted once toward Martin Hale. Then toward the hallway outside chambers. Something unsettled flickered behind her calm for the first time all morning. Whitmore noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Danielle hesitated. Just long enough for tension to creep back into the room. "Martin delayed filings," she said carefully. "But he did not start this." Silence again. Heavy silence. Martin slowly looked up for the first time, fear replacing shame. Danielle turned toward the courtroom entrance, jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "The person who planned this," she said softly, "still has not shown up." Then, somewhere down the courthouse hallway, came the slow echo of expensive dress shoes approaching the courtroom. The sound of expensive shoes stopped just outside the courtroom doors. Then silence. The kind that made people sit straighter without knowing why. Nobody reached for their phones now. Nobody whispered. Even the fluorescent lights overhead seemed softer somehow, humming low against the polished marble walls. Danielle Brooks remained standing near counsel table, fingers resting lightly against the worn leather folder she had carried all day. Calm. Still. Waiting. The doors finally opened. A woman stepped inside in a charcoal coat, silver hair pinned neatly back, posture sharp despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Federal Prosecutor Evelyn Mercer. The room shifted instantly. Richard Halpern looked away first. Too quickly. Too late. Evelyn held a slim folder against her side and walked straight past him without slowing down. The sound of her heels echoed lightly across the floor. Measured. Final. Mr. Halpern, she said quietly, not unkindly, we will need a moment of your time. Nobody moved. Halpern forced a laugh that sounded thinner than paper. This is absurd. But nobody came to his defense. Not anymore. Even his own team avoided eye contact. The room had already decided who was standing alone. Judge Whitmore watched it unfold from the bench, shoulders heavier than they had been that morning. The authority was still there, but something inside him had changed shape. His eyes moved slowly toward Danielle. For a moment, he simply looked at her. Really looked. The woman he had dismissed before she spoke. The woman everyone underestimated. The only person who had walked into the storm without pretending it was not there. Evelyn placed several papers before the bench. Quiet signatures. Quiet consequences. The loudest moments rarely arrived loudly. Halpern stood frozen, lips parting once, then again, but words refused to come. Across the room, the young associate who had laughed at Danielle earlier quietly shut his laptop and lowered his head. Nobody looked proud of themselves anymore. Somewhere near the back, a phone camera slowly lowered. The moment no longer needed recording. It needed witnessing. Danielle gathered her papers carefully. No victory smile. No speech. Just quiet hands and steady breathing. The same composure she carried when everyone thought she did not belong. Judge Whitmore cleared his throat softly. Ms. Brooks. The courtroom turned toward her one last time. Danielle paused. Whitmore stood slowly from the bench. For a second, it looked like the words almost stayed trapped behind pride. But they did not. I was wrong, he said quietly. No excuses? No performance. Just truth. The room went still again. Danielle held his gaze. In the reflection of the courthouse lights, his eyes looked older somehow. Less certain. More human. You judged me before you heard me, she said softly. Not angry. Not cruel. Just honest. Whitmore lowered his eyes briefly. Yes, he said. The single word landed heavier than anything else spoken all day. Danielle nodded once. Then reached for her father's old leather folder. The edges were worn smooth from years of carrying dreams nobody else could see. Good thing the truth does not need permission to enter a courtroom, she said quietly. No one spoke after that. Outside, evening light stretched long shadows through the courthouse windows, soft gold cutting across cold marble floors. The noise of the day had finally settled into something quieter. Something earned. Danielle turned and walked toward the doors, heels soft against polished stone. Nobody stopped her. Nobody laughed now. People moved out of the way without thinking. Respect had arrived quietly. The way real things usually did. Just before she reached the exit, she felt it. A pause behind her. Judge Whitmore had stepped down from the bench. Not above her anymore. Not towering over anyone. Just standing there. Human. Humbled. Danielle glanced back once. He gave the smallest nod. Nothing dramatic. Nothing spoken. But enough. Outside, the cold Chicago air met her face as courthouse lights flickered on behind the glass. She stood there for one long second, breathing slowly, her father's folder held close against her side. Above the courthouse entrance, reflected in the evening windows, the city moved like nothing had changed. But inside, everyone knew it had. And for the first time all day, the silence finally felt like justice.